Nutshell. Sounds interesting. Hello friends, I'm Brainy. Well, I always wonder, did God made walnut first or the brain first? They're just like twins. Why am I saying so? Well, have a look. Brain in a nutshell, literally. See this nutshell. This is a walnut. Just like a hard shell of walnut, our brain is also placed in a cranium for protection. There is a gap between the walnut and its shell. So does our brain have a gap which is filled with meninges. The layers are called as meninges. And then there are folds and then there are grooves, so which are called sulci and gyri. Then even our brain has a right hemisphere and left hemisphere, just like seen in walnut. And there is a big longitudinal fissure which is seen here and in our brain as well. So out of curiosity, I made a model using walnuts. This must be the smallest brain model I've made. Well, next time someone's call you a nut, don't take it otherwise. Being an architect, I'm used to software called AutoCAD. This time, instead of drafting a building, I tried to draft a brain. So there was this five-step process by which I created a model. I will just tell you this briefly, what all I did. So in this process, what I did was, I first created a median section in 3D in the AutoCAD software. Then I converted it into different layers, and then I converted that into PNG images. I took those images on PowerPoint, and then on PowerPoint I labeled it. So this was the final result. So this is how the layers were created, and my model in AutoCAD software looked like this finally. So this is the medial section of that. Now what is brain? Actually, brain has three major parts. So one is brainstem, then you have hindbrain, and then you have forebrain. So brainstem again has three parts: medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. Hindbrain consists of cerebellum. Forebrain has two major parts, diencephalon and cerebrum. We'll see the other details in other slides. So let's talk about brainstem first. So what is brainstem? Let's see part by part. Okay. So brainstem has a medulla oblongata, then pons and midbrain. So the medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brainstem, found below the pons and above the spinal cord. So most important action linked to the medulla is regulation of cardiovascular and the respiratory function. Now the pons literally means bridge in Latin, and it connects the hindbrain to the cerebral cortex and medulla oblongata. It also serves as a communication and coordination center between the two hemispheres of the brain. Now midbrain is situated above the pons. The midbrain it serves as functions in motor movement, particularly the movement of eyes, and in auditory and visual processing. Like if something passes by us, our eyes will follow that. Now let's look at the cerebellum. The cerebellum lies inferior to the cerebrum at back of the head. It is mostly involved in the coordination of movement and fine tuning of motor activities. Now fourth ventricle is situated in cerebellum, whereas the other three ventricles are situated in cerebrum. Cerebellum is involved with several functions including fine movement coordination, then balance and equilibrium, muscle tone, sense of body positioning, etc. Now this forebrain is further divided into cerebrum and diencephalon. Diencephalon is located around third ventricle and surrounded by two lateral ventricles. It consists of thalamus, hypothalamus, a pituitary gland, and pineal gland. The thalamus is often described as a relay station, because a great deal of information that proceeds to the cortex first stops in the thalamus before being sent to the destination. Now, the hypothalamus is a small region situated directly above the brainstem. It is made up of collection of nuclei with variety of functions, but in general, the hypothalamus is involved in controlling the 2H, which is homeostasis and hormones. So it acts like a thermostat to the body. Now, this hypothalamus manipulates hormone release primarily by controlling the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is a hormone secreting gland that sits just below the hypothalamus. It is sometimes called the master gland, and because it controls the other glands also throughout the body. It also releases the growth hormone and oxytocin. So you may call it as an undercover boss. Now the pineal gland, this small endocrine gland produces hormone melatonin. Production of this hormone is vital to the regulation of sleep and wake cycles and also influences the sexual development. It is like an alarm clock in our body. Now let's see the cerebrum second part, which is forebrain, which is further divided into two hemispheres and 4 lobes each. Let's look at it one by one. So the first one is the occipital lobe, which is situated at the back of the brain above cerebellum and behind the parietal lobe. Occipital lobe is responsible for receiving and processing visual information from the retina. Then let's move on to the next one, parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is located behind the central sulcus and above the occipital lobe. So it is responsible for receiving, processing and sensory information. So these lobe also contain, also contain the somatosensory cortex, which is essential for processing sensation like temperature, touch, pressure and pain. Now let's move on to the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is situated in front portion of the brain, hence the name, and it consists of prefrontal cortex, then premotor area, the motor area of the brain. These lobes function in voluntary muscle movement and functions like memory, thinking, decision making, planning, also controlling motor functions and performing higher order functions such as reasoning and problem solving. Moving on to temporal lobe. Temporal lobe is situated at both sides of the brain and it is the home of the limbic system structure, including the amygdala and hippocampus. These lobes organize sensory input and aid in auditory perception. Moving on to the Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Now, Broca's area is partly responsible for the ability to produce and process language, and person with damaged Broca's area will lose an ability to produce intangible words. This can sometimes be treated by teaching the patient to sing, and they can talk then that way. So Wernicke's area is involved in speech comprehension and formatting meaningful sentences. So both these areas are located in the left hemisphere. Broca's area in frontal lobe and Wernicke's area in temporal lobe. Now let us look at the limbic system. The limbic system is located within the cerebrum of the brain, immediately below the temporal lobes and buried under the cerebral cortex. It mainly consists of amygdala, hippocampus and hypothalamus. The term amygdala means almond. So the amygdala has been known for its role in processing fearful emotions and initiating flight and fight response. So there is hippocampus in the temporal lobe of each cerebral hemisphere. The name hippocampus comes from the Greeks for seahorse. Although it has many functions, the hippocampus is best known for long-term memory. Now, after representing the whole brain as a walnut, I thought of some of the brain parts like some buildings in the city, where frontal lobe and Broca's area is symbolized as school of a brain because that is where we learn language and other higher order functioning. Then I thought of hypothalamus as house or home of brain, because here the best environment is created for our well-being. Like hypothalamus is the thermostat. Then thalamus as post office of brain, for it acts like one in our brain, sending the message to correct location. Hippocampus, which is involved in long-term memory, is imagined like a big library which stores all the information. Then as amygdala warns in fight and flight situation and protects us from danger, is symbolized as police station of brain. Peripheral nervous system, I symbolized it as electric supply system throughout the city, where electric lines represent neuron and nerves. Now there is a striking similarity between the structure of a neuron and a tree. Thus I have symbolized neuron as a tree, where I have compared different parts of neuron with tree, as you can see in the diagram. Here observe that parts of the neuron like dendrites are like branches, axon like stem, myelin sheath is like bark, and axon terminals are like roots of the tree. Fascinated with this, I chose to study in depth about neuron. So I made a model of neuron. So I have used copper wire from electric wires as axon and dendrites, straw as a myelin sheath, and cell body was made out of a ball with inbuilt light to replicate the effect of synapse of flickering light. Brain contains around 85 billion neurons. Now these neuron is a nerve cell and is primary functional unit of the nervous system. Now the dendrites are the area where neuron receive most of their information. There are receptors on dendrites that are designed to pick up signal from the other neurons, and in the form of chemical called neurotransmitters. Then those signals picked up by the dendrite cause electrical changes in the neuron that are interpreted in an area called soma or a cell body. Now these signals are further sent through the axon, and in axon they are called as action potential. There is a myelin sheath as an insulating material around this axon. And now the last step is the action potential in the axon terminal is also called as synaptic button, where once the signal is reached there, it again releases the neurotransmitter, and this process is repeated to the next neuron. So this is what is seen in this image as a graphical representation. Oops, that was too much of information. I hope this presentation has fired many neurons in your brain, because mine has, and it's already exhausted. Maybe my brain needs to meditate now. So that's all, folks. Thank you so much.